I am Madison, 32 years old, and I have spent my entire life being the daughter my parents forgot to love. Last October, I sent my family the most important invitation of my career. My father's response? He laughed and he called me just a high-end beggar. My sister said she was too busy because she had a yacht party. My mother, she did not even bother to type a reply. She simply liked my sister's message, and then she moved on. Drop a comment, and let me know where you were listening from and what time it is for you right now. I would love to know who is part of our community. Also, have you ever felt like the invisible one in your own family? I sat in my office in Chicago, staring at the cold glow of my phone screen. The silence from my family was not a surprise. It was a familiar accounting of my worth in their eyes. For years, I had been the underwriting shadow of their version of family, always providing the collateral of my soul and never seeing a return. I looked at the digital invitation I had sent. It was an official summons to the United Nations headquarters in New York, a ceremony to honor those who had dedicated their lives to international relief and human rights. I was being recognized for my work in war zones, for building bridges where they had been burned, but to my father, Charles, if it did not come with a dividend, it was just a hobby. I did not cry. Crying is a luxury for people who still have hope to lose. I did not ask why, and I certainly did not try to explain the significance of the Peace Award. Instead, I opened my laptop. Anger was not loud this time. It was clinical. I rubbed my eyes, trying to summon regret, but there was only clarity. This was not a breakdown. It was a balance sheet. For 3 years, I had held the keys to the Patricia Foundation, the legacy my grandmother built. She was the one who saw my strength when my parents only saw a liability. She had left me in charge of the audit logs, giving me the power to trigger a full, independent review of every cent moving through our family accounts. I had delayed it out of a lingering sense of loyalty, a subscription to a family dynamic that had long since expired. I looked at my mother, Kimberly, had left on Jasmine's text. That thumbs up was the final signature on our contract. I clicked over to my secure email and sent a single, one-word message to our lead trust attorney, proceed. Within minutes, the wheels of a 3-year-old contingency plan began to turn. My family thought they were going to a yacht party to celebrate Jasmine's latest billion-dollar hedge fund deal. They thought they could continue to overdraft my compassion without ever facing a penalty. They were wrong. This was not revenge. It was accounting. And by the time I stepped onto that stage in New York, their accounts would be empty in more ways than one. I looked at the scar on my palm, a jagged reminder of a shrapnel fragment I took while setting up a mobile clinic in South Sudan 5 years ago. In the high-stakes world of my family's Chicago mansion, that scar was an eyesore to be covered by silk gloves. To me, it was a receipt for a life they could not even imagine. While my sister Jasmine was busy calculating her next $500,000 bonus, I was calculating how many liters of clean water could be bought with the price of her left shoe. My family lived in a world of polished marble and fake smiles, a world where the only noise was the clinking of crystal and the hum of private jets. I had spent a decade moving through war zones and disaster sites, where the noise was mortar fire and the silence was far more terrifying. I realized then that I was not just a different person. I was an entirely different species. My compassion had been a luxury they had overdrafted for years, and for a long time, I let them. This brings me to a realization I call the invisible chains of the survivor. For years, I believed I was sacrificing my happiness for the sake of family unity. I thought that if I just worked harder, stayed quieter, and gave more, they would finally see my value. But I was not an investor in their love. I was a hostage to my own goodness. It was a prison without bars, built out of my own sense of duty. I had fallen into the trap of normalized cruelty, where their dismissal became the background noise of my life. I convinced myself that their coldness was just their way, and that my job was to be the emotional buffer for their narcissism. I was the unacknowledged creditor in a business that was fundamentally bankrupt of character. Standing in my childhood bedroom, surrounded by trophies Jasmine had won and awards I had been told to keep in a drawer, the clarity was lethal. I looked at the National Peace Award invitation again. They saw it as an admission of my failure to enter the real world of finance. I saw it as my final exit visa. The invisible chains did not snap with a loud bang. They dissolved in the cold acid of their latest rejection. I realized I did not owe them my loyalty, my presence, or my silence. I had been footing the bill for a family subscription that provided zero service. I was not the invisible daughter anymore. I was the person holding the ledger. My father, Charles, always said that in business, you cut your losses and move on. He was right, for once. I was cutting them. As I packed my single bag for New York, I did not feel sadness. I felt the kind of peace that only comes when you realize the person you were trying to save was actually yourself. I stepped into the Chicago mansion for the last time. The air smelled of expensive lilies and the underlying rot of entitlement. My father was holding court near the grand staircase, a glass of 30-year-old scotch in his hand. He was celebrating Jasmine's inclusion in the 40 under 40 list, an event he considered the peak of human achievement. And here's my other daughter, Madison, Charles announced as I walked toward the study. He did not even look at me. He looked at his circle of high-level investors, using me as a punchline to keep them entertained. She represents the charity arm of our family. For those of you who do not know, that means she specializes in spending other people's money instead of making it. Laughter rippled through the group. It was the same sharp, condescending laughter I had heard in the video my uncle sent, but this time it was live and unedited. I did not flinch. I did not defend the 10 years I had spent building schools or the thousands of lives my team had saved. To a man who measured worth in basis points, those were just expenses with no return on investment. I was a professional. I did not let emotion interfere with the data. I just kept walking to retrieve the final audit papers my grandmother had left for me in the wall safe. My mother caught me in the hallway before I could exit. Kimberly looked stunning in a designer gown that cost more than the annual budget of the clinics I managed. She did not ask about my flight to New York, or how I felt about receiving the Peace Award. She did not even look me in the eye. Madison, about your little event at the United Nations tomorrow, she said, her voice dropping to a sharp whisper. We have discussed it, and we think it is best if you do not mention our family name during your speech. We have a specific reputation to maintain in the financial sector. Being associated with global relief and humanitarian aid looks soft. It does not exactly fit the brand of a high-performance investment firm. I stared at her, my gaze as clinical as an autopsy report. The brand of success? Exactly, she replied, patting my arm as if I were a slow child. Jasmine is doing real work. She is moving hundreds of millions of dollars. Your father is very proud of the image she has built. You are just helping people. It is a nice hobby, dear, but let us not pretend it is on the same level as what your sister does. We do not want to confuse the market. I looked at her, then passed her at Jasmine, who was currently bragging about her $500,000 quarterly bonus to a venture capitalist. They were so busy performing wealth that they had completely ignored the basic arithmetic of character. They had no idea that I was no longer the ghost shareholder in their lives. Do not worry, mother, I said, my voice flat and final. I will not mention you. In fact, by this time tomorrow, you might find that you are the ones who do not want to be associated with me. She did not catch the warning. She just smiled, satisfied that she had managed her inconvenient daughter. She went back to the party, back to the champagne and the fake praise. I walked out of the house with the audit files tucked under my arm. Inside those folders was the truth about where Jasmine's genius actually came from. It was not market insight, it was theft. My father had secretly diverted $25 million from the foundation's emergency relief fund to cover Jasmine's massive investment losses. They thought I was the one who could not make it in the real world. They thought they were the predators and I was the prey. But the ledger always balances in the end. As I drove toward the airport, the Chicago mansion fading in my rearview mirror, I knew the party was over. They just had not seen the bill yet. The air in New York was crisp smelling of rain and expensive ambition. I did not head to a luxury hotel. I went straight to a secure office near the United Nations complex where the audit team was waiting. These were not the kind of accountants who handled family taxes. These were forensic specialists who tracked blood money across borders. They did not offer me tea or sympathy. They offered me a stack of papers that weighed more than any weapon I had ever carried in a war zone. It is worse than we thought, Madison, the lead auditor said, sliding a red folder across the mahogany table. I opened it. My eyes tracked the numbers with the same cold precision I used to triage patients in a field hospital. Charles had not just borrowed money to cover a rough quarter. He had systematically gutted the Patricia Foundation's Emergency Relief Fund. $25 million. That money was earmarked for earthquake victims and refugee camps. Instead, it had been funneled through a series of offshore accounts to mask the catastrophic losses Jasmine had incurred in her latest venture capital gamble. My father had gambled with the lives of children to protect the golden child's reputation. Then I saw the final piece of the audit, the transfer authorizations. My signature was on every single one of them. It was a clumsy forgery, but in the fast-paced world of international wire transfers, it had been enough. He hadn't just forged my ink, he had exploited my old administrative credentials from when I was a trustee. He used a legacy override code that bypassed the standard multi-factor verification, weaponizing the very trust the bank had in our family name. My father had not just stolen money, he had stolen my identity to commit federal financial crimes. He had turned me into his unwilling accomplice in a $25 million fraud. I did not feel a surge of adrenaline. I felt the familiar weight of a job that needed to be finished. I looked at the lead auditor and then at my attorney, who was holding a freshly signed federal injunction. "This is not a family matter anymore," my attorney said, his voice as clinical as my own. "This is embezzlement, wire fraud, and misappropriation of charitable funds. It is federal territory." I didn't just sign a complaint. I signed the authorization for an emergency asset recovery. My attorney already had the federal judge on standby. The injunction wasn't just a piece of paper. It was a legal killshot that moved faster than my father's offshore transfers. The document in my hand officially suspended Charles and Kimberly from every executive position in the foundation. It stripped them of their voting rights, and most importantly, it authorized an immediate freeze on all subsidiary accounts linked to the family name. They had spent 32 years teaching me that family was just a business transaction where they held all the shares. They had treated my goodness as a resource they could exploit until the well ran dry. But they had forgotten the most basic rule of the market. Eventually, the silent investor stops paying the bills and takes over the company. I looked at the clock. In Chicago, they were just about to sit down for dinner at Park Brasserie. They would be surrounded by their peers, drinking wine that cost more than a month of my salary, laughing about my meaningless award. "Send the notices," I said, "and make sure the wire to Bloomberg goes out the second I step onto that stage." I walked out of the office, the federal order tucked safely in my bag. I was not just a teacher or a relief worker anymore. I was the person holding the debt they could never repay. I was not going to the United Nations to beg for their love. I was going there to reclaim my name and bury theirs under the weight of the truth. The party was over. I was just the one delivering the bill. The lights in the General Assembly Hall were blinding, a stark contrast to the shadows I had lived in for 32 years. 2,000 people were in their seats, a sea of suits and silences, all waiting for the high-end beggar to take the stage. I stood behind the heavy velvet curtain, my fingers tracing the cold edges of the federal injunction. This was the moment the silent investor stopped being silent. 300 miles away, at Park Brasserie in Chicago, my family was finishing their second bottle of crystal champagne. I knew the setting perfectly, the window view of the Gold Coast skyline, the white linen that cost more than a teacher's monthly rent, the smug laughter of people who believed their bank accounts were a substitute for a soul. Charles would be leaning back, expanding on his latest investment theory, while Kimberly adjusted her diamond earrings, basking in the reflected glow of Jasmine's manufactured success. I stepped onto the stage. The applause was a physical wave, but I did not let it soften me. I was not there for the praise. I was there for the accounting. As I reached the podium, I saw the red light of the main camera flicker on. Live to millions. Live to the screens in a certain French restaurant in Chicago. At that exact moment, 100 phones in Park Brasserie vibrated simultaneously. It was a Bloomberg breaking news alert. I watched it happen in my mind's eye, the way the diners would pause, the way the ambient noise would drop as people read their screens. The headline was "Clinical and Lethal. New president of Patricia Foundation revealed federal injunction and asset freeze executed against investor Charles Carter. In the restaurant, my father's face would have turned the color of ash. He probably reached for his phone, thinking it was a glitch in the market, a temporary dip he could buy his way out of. But then his black card was presented for the $50,000 dinner bill. I watched the power flip climax play out through the data I had set in motion. The waiter, trained in the highest levels of discretion, would have returned to the table. He wouldn't have made a scene. He would have leaned in, his voice a polite shadow, and whispered that the primary corporate account had been flagged by federal authorities. He would then ask for an alternative, knowing full well there wasn't one. The card did not just fail, it was flagged for immediate seizure. This is the illusion of power from an empty wallet. My father had spent decades believing he was a king because he stood on a mountain of my grandmother's money. He thought his arrogance was a personality trait, but it was actually just the lease-to-own facade. He did not realize that without the foundation's capital, he was not a titan of industry. He was just an old man in an expensive suit he could no longer afford to dry clean. His power was not internal, it was a subscription service, and I had just canceled his membership. I looked directly into the camera, knowing he was watching. Growing up, I began, my voice steady and cold. I was told that my worth was measured by what I could contribute to a brand. I was told that compassion was a liability. But my grandmother, Patricia, knew a truth that this family forgot. She knew that wealth is a tool, not an identity, and that those who use charity as a personal piggy bank eventually find that the bank is closed. The silence in the United Nations Hall was absolute. The silence at the table in Chicago must have been even louder. Charles would have been looking around at his friends, the high-level investors who were already sliding their chairs back, distancing themselves from the smell of a federal investigation. He was experiencing a narcissistic injury so deep it would never heal. He was not shocked by his own crimes. He was shocked that the daughter he had called lowly had the precision to strip him of his armor in front of the entire world. I did not smile. A victory based on facts does not need a grin. I simply adjusted the microphone and continued my speech, leaving the family who forgot to love me to figure out how they were going to pay for their $50,000 appetizers with a frozen account and a ruined name. The ledger was balanced. The silent investor was now the owner. The fallout was swift and absolute, a market correction 32 years in the making. By the time I walked off that stage in New York, the Charles Carter brand had reached zero value. The Bloomberg alert was not just a headline, it was a liquidation notice. In the weeks that followed, the forensic auditors I hired systematically dismantled the house of cards my father had built. Jasmine's quarterly bonus, clawed back. The Chicago mansion, listed for sale to cover the $25 million stolen from the Emergency Relief Fund. My father and sister were not just facing social exile. They were facing federal indictments for wire fraud and embezzlement. I moved into my new office at the United Nations Plaza, a space that did not smell like old scotch and entitlement. My first act as the sole president of the Patricia Foundation was to terminate the family subscription model. No more luxury cars masquerading as business expenses, no more yacht parties billed as donor outreach. I restructured my grandmother's legacy, ensuring that every cent went to the war zones and refugee camps Charles had treated like his personal petty cash drawer. My parents tried to call, of course. Charles sent a frantic email claiming that family forgives family. Kimberly left a voicemail sobbing about how they were being bullied by the press and forced into a modest 3-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood they used to mock. I did not answer a single one. I did not feel the need to explain that their current situation was simply the natural consequence of their own investment strategy. They had bet everything on arrogance and theft, and the market had finally closed. This brings me to my final message, a letter to those of you who have spent your lives sitting at the spare table. To those of you who have been the silent investors in toxic relationships, waiting for a return that never comes. You have been told that your worth is determined by those who refuse to see you. You have been told that your goodness is a liability and your compassion is a weakness. I am here to tell you that they are wrong. Your worth is not a stock price that fluctuates based on someone else's opinion. It is a fixed asset. The invisible chains that keep you hostage to their approval only have the power you give them. You do not need a seat at their table when you have the capacity to build your own empire. Stop trying to earn the respect of people who only value you when they can use you. Your compassion is a luxury, and it is time you stop letting them overdraft it. I opened my laptop and pulled up my old contact list. I looked at the names that used to define my world: Charles, Kimberly, Jasmine. I did not feel anger. I did not feel triumph. I felt the quiet, cold peace of a closed ledger. I highlighted the group, hit delete, and watched the screen clear. Inside, my office glowed with a different kind of sunrise, the kind made of facts, numbers, and the realization that I was finally free. If Madison's journey to reclaim her honor and value has given you the courage to choose yourself, please share this video. Your story matters, and your worth is undeniable. Hit that subscribe button so you do not miss our next journey into reclaiming the truth. Thank you for listening until the very last minute.